There are moments in American pop culture that feel larger than life, moments that stretch beyond celebrity, beyond fame, beyond music. They become chapters in the national story, etched not just in headlines, but in the minds of millions. For 3 decades, Sean Diddy Combs wrote one of those chapters. From the club lights of New York to the gold-plated corridors of Beverly Hills, he wasn't just a musician. He wasn't just a mogul. He was the image of power. Wealth, influence, legacy. Unshakable, undefeated, and, until recently, untouchable. But then the silence broke. And when it did, it wasn't through a song, a press release, or a public statement. It was through the footsteps of federal agents raiding his homes, the snap of court documents filed quietly in the night, and the unmistakable tension of a courtroom preparing for a fight unlike anything the industry had seen before. Allegations surfaced, first whispered, then shouted. Abuse, control, coercion. One after another, the stories emerged, years in the making, decades in the shadows. Cassie, once seen smiling beside him, now named in the lawsuits. Others followed, and the image, polished, untouchable, started to crack. Still, Diddy denied everything. His team pushed back, and for a while, it felt like the chaos might fade. But justice has a pace of its own, and just days ago, a decision finally came. After weeks of testimony, sealed motions, tense deliberations, the jury stepped forward, delivering a partial verdict. Not a full answer, not a clean break. A statement caught between guilt and silence, between truth and uncertainty. The courtroom was stunned. Reporters stood frozen. Even seasoned attorneys couldn't explain it. Not entirely. Why now? Why only part of a verdict? What happens behind closed doors? What were the jurors allowed to hear, and what were they told to ignore? Do you think Diddy's influence affected the verdict? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe now. In a trial with this much at stake, was the outcome shaped by evidence or by influence? And if justice stopped halfway, who or what stopped it? This is the story the headlines haven't told. This is the silence that speaks louder than guilt or innocence. Before the courtrooms, before the lawsuits, there was a boy from Harlem with headphones around his neck and a vision no one else could see. Sean Combs didn't just break into the music industry, he forced the doors open. Intern at Uptown Records, party promoter, hustler. He watched, listened, and moved faster than anyone around him. By the time he was 23, he wasn't just behind the scenes, he was the scene. He founded Bad Boy Records in 1993. And what followed was a run so dominant, it reshaped hip-hop. The signing of the notorious B.I.G. wasn't just a career milestone, it was the ignition point of a cultural explosion. Every club, every radio station, every music video. It was Diddy's sound, Diddy's brand, Diddy's rules. From platinum albums to million-dollar music videos, he curated a lifestyle, one where success wasn't quiet and power wasn't subtle. He called it the life. Private jets, champagne showers, all access everything. But his empire wasn't just built on music. He mastered the pivot. C-Rock vodka, Sean John fashion, Revolt TV. By the early 2000s, Diddy was no longer just a hip-hop icon. He was a businessman, by every definition of the word. He appeared on Forbes lists, magazine covers, political events. He stood next to presidents, sat courtside with billionaires. His influence was no longer cultural, it was institutional. There was a time when simply being seen next to Diddy could shift careers. A co-sign from him could turn an unknown artist into a superstar overnight. An invitation to his parties was a rite of passage into elite circles. But with that influence came something else, something rarely acknowledged in public, a kind of insulation. For years, whispers trailed his name. Scuffles in clubs, civil settlements, alleged assaults that disappeared from headlines almost as quickly as they appeared. But nothing ever stuck. No charges, no trials, no losses that couldn't be absorbed. It wasn't just that Diddy won, it was that he couldn't lose. The people around him changed, the music evolved, but the control? That remained. He didn't just survive decades in a ruthless industry, he outlasted it. Artists came and went, labels rose and fell, but Diddy remained. For fans, he was the soundtrack to their youth. For the business world, he was a case study in Black entrepreneurship and cultural dominance. For insiders, he was a gatekeeper. And for some, he was a man you didn't challenge. That's what made the headline so shocking. That's what made the lawsuit so different. Because this wasn't some faded star trying to stay relevant. This was Diddy, at the height of his power, suddenly under a microscope, and this time, the spotlight wasn't his to control. To understand what happened in that courtroom, to understand why the jury only delivered a partial verdict, you have to go back, past the public image, past the fame, back to where the first cracks appeared. Because the truth didn't start in court. It started with a lawsuit. One name, one woman, and a story that had waited over a decade to be told. On November 16, 2023, a single document changed everything. It was 35 pages long, filed in a New York court, stamped, logged, and released to the public. At the top of the first page, one name stood out: Cassandra Ventura, known to the world as Cassie, singer, model, former girlfriend of Sean Diddy Combs. For over a decade, the two had been seen together, sometimes smiling, sometimes not, but rarely questioned. Their relationship had always lived in a space between stardom and silence. Until that lawsuit. Because what Cassie alleged wasn't vague, it wasn't subtle, it was direct, brutal, and specific. According to the filing, she accused Combs of years of physical abuse, coercive control, and forced acts she claimed were never consensual. She detailed hotel encounters, described patterns of manipulation, alleged surveillance, threats, intimidation. It wasn't just a breakup gone wrong. It wasn't tabloid rumor. It was a legal document under oath, naming names, dates, and places. And the industry took notice. For years, the whispers had circled. But this was evidence, signed, sworn, and public. Diddy denied it all. Through his lawyers, he called the claims outrageous. He called the lawsuit a money grab. And within 24 hours, they settled. No court trial, no cross-examination, no further public testimony. But the timing of that settlement raised questions. Why so fast? Why now? And what did it mean? To some, it looked like damage control. To others, a calculated silence. But the story didn't end there. In fact, that was only the beginning. Because after Cassie filed, a flood of new lawsuits followed, all within the window of New York's Adult Survivors Act, an expiring law that temporarily lifted the statute of limitations for civil suits on sexual abuse. One woman alleged she was assaulted at gunpoint by Combs in the 1990s. Another claimed she was trafficked across state lines. There were allegations involving drugs, hotel staff, music video sets. Each suit painted a picture, not just of misconduct, but of a system around Diddy, assistants, security, executives, who allegedly helped hide it. And just when the headlines felt like they couldn't escalate further, they did. On March 25, 2024, federal agents from Homeland Security raided 2 properties linked to Diddy, one in Los Angeles, one in Miami. They arrived with tactical gear, drawn weapons, and sealed warrants. For the public, it was sudden, but for law enforcement, it had been building for months. Sources described an ongoing investigation into allegations of trafficking, illicit recordings, and witness tampering. Digital devices were seized, hard drives, cell phones, surveillance footage. And although no arrests were made that day, the message was clear. This wasn't just about civil claims anymore. It was federal, and it was serious. Combs' legal team responded swiftly, calling the raids excessive and accusing authorities of a media spectacle. But behind closed doors, something had changed. People who had stayed quiet for years began to speak. A former bodyguard gave an interview. An ex-assistant went public. Private investigators confirmed they had been contacted. Patterns were beginning to emerge. Alleged victims who had never met told eerily similar stories. Locations overlapped, timelines aligned. And slowly, the media began to shift from skepticism to scrutiny. And with scrutiny came fear. Sources went silent. Social media accounts were deleted. Some witnesses reportedly hired security of their own. What had started as a celebrity lawsuit was turning into something much larger. And as pressure built, courtrooms began to fill. Subpoenas were issued. Protective orders were filed. And one case in particular moved forward faster than the rest. The trial that would bring the jury in. The one the public wasn't supposed to see. But someone had been watching, and when the verdict came down, it wasn't what anyone expected. No cameras, no press, no streaming feeds from inside the courtroom, only transcripts, sketches, whispers from those who sat within four walls and saw it unfold. The public didn't get to watch the trial, but they felt its weight. It began quietly. No celebrity entrances, no paparazzi outside. Just a courtroom in New York, sealed by statute and protected by protocol. The judge issued a partial gag order. Names redacted, motions filed under seal. The media could only speculate, but inside, the air was heavy. The prosecution laid out a case built on disturbing consistency. 3 accusers, none publicly named, each telling a version of the same story. Power, intimidation, control. Behind the glamour, behind the cameras, one woman testified that she had signed NDAs under duress. Another spoke through her attorney of hidden cameras in hotel suites, footage no one could locate, devices that had gone missing, digital records that couldn't be recovered. There were mentions of burner phones, encrypted messaging apps, payments made in cash, no paper trail. Witnesses from Diddy's inner circle were called. An ex-driver, a former tour manager. Some complied. Others invoked the fifth. Defense attorneys struck back hard. They argued the stories were fabricated, opportunistic. They presented photos of smiling dinners, videos of backstage celebrations. They questioned the timing of the lawsuits, the expiration of the Adult Survivors Act. They called it coordinated, strategic. And yet, the stories didn't unravel. They echoed. The prosecution had no smoking gun, no video evidence, no physical proof. Only testimony, patterns, details that never made it to TMZ. And in a case this complex, the weight of truth wasn't simple. It was heavy. It was human. Behind closed doors, jurors were shown sealed exhibits. They weren't allowed to speak to the press. They weren't even allowed to ask certain questions. Sources say one piece of evidence, a set of text messages, had been removed from consideration. A ruling on admissibility had gone in the defense's favor. Key witness testimony was delayed, then restricted. And then, something unexpected happened. A juror was dismissed, no reason given, replaced by an alternate. Days later, another motion. Filed in camera, sealed again. The trial was stretching longer than anticipated. At least 2 continuances were granted. Court watchers noticed a change in tone. The prosecution stopped calling witnesses. The defense rested abruptly. And finally, the verdict. But it wasn't what anyone had prepared for. The jury entered. 12 people. Stoic. Silent. The foreperson stood and read aloud. We have reached a partial verdict. Partial. Not a full exoneration. Not a conviction. A middle ground. Uncertain. Unresolved. On one charge, liability was confirmed. On another, no consensus. 2 counts remained undecided. The courtroom froze. Reporters waiting outside scrambled for clarity. Legal analysts tried to interpret what it meant. Had they run out of time? Was there a hung jury on key counts? Or had they been blocked, limited in what they were allowed to consider? The judge thanked the jury, dismissed them, sealed parts of the verdict. No sentencing, no definitive ruling, just a partial truth. And for a trial with this much gravity, that raised bigger questions. Was justice served or just paused? And in a system where influence and evidence collide, who decides what the jury is allowed to see? Because this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a test of something far more fragile: faith in the system. It takes more than evidence to win a case like this. It takes access. It takes will. It takes permission. And the deeper you look into the trial of Sean Diddy Combs, the more it becomes clear this wasn't just about what happened. It was about who controls what gets seen. In any courtroom, there are two stories: the one told out loud and the one hidden in motions, sealed files, behind the bench whispers. From the beginning, Diddy arrived with a legal team stacked with former federal prosecutors, lawyers with ties to high-profile firms, decades of litigation experience, and networks that stretched far beyond the courtroom. They challenged nearly every piece of evidence, fought to keep accusers anonymous, filed motions to strike, redact, and suppress. And in many cases, they won. Text threads disappeared from the record. Audio clips ruled inadmissible. A subpoena for financial transfers blocked on technical grounds. Some observers say this is how the system works, that any high-powered defendant would be entitled to the same legal defense. But others aren't so sure, because the influence didn't stop at the courtroom steps. It seeped into headlines, into silence. In the weeks leading up to the verdict, two publications pulled their investigative stories. One network dropped an upcoming segment with no public explanation. Two former associates who had agreed to testify abruptly declined. One claimed personal safety. Another cited a non-disclosure agreement signed over a decade ago, with penalties they couldn't risk. Behind the scenes, there were meetings, there were calls, and then there were the settlements. While one case moved to trial, 3 others disappeared quietly, dropped, sealed, confidential. Each one settled out of court, terms undisclosed. And then there's the question of surveillance. According to legal filings, Combs employed a network of private security firms, several of them staffed by former law enforcement, people with access to police records, databases, and internal channels. One suit alleged that complainants were followed, that witnesses were monitored, that even attorneys were approached by independent third parties, untraceable, off the books. None of these claims have been proven in court, but the pattern is difficult to ignore. And in the background, a quieter force was working just as hard: silence. Few celebrities spoke up. Few brands pulled partnerships. Not one major artist, past or present, openly condemned him. Why? Is it loyalty? Fear? Or the knowledge that power, when shaken, tends to fall in unpredictable ways? Because Diddy wasn't just a star. He signed artists, funded companies, made people rich. To this day, there are public figures whose entire rise can be traced back to one handshake with him. And if he falls, how far does the collapse spread? That's the unspoken question. Not just whether Diddy will be held accountable, but whether anyone around him will. How many turned a blind eye? How many helped? How many knew? Because if influence can reshape a trial, then maybe the real verdict never leaves the courtroom at all. A jury gave a partial answer, but the full story? That's being protected by fear, by power, and by silence bought in advance. The courtroom is empty now. The jury dismissed. Files sealed. Statements issued. But outside those walls, the fallout is only beginning. Because a partial verdict doesn't erase the rate of what was said. It doesn't silence the accusations. It doesn't unhear what's now public record. It lingers. In every contract being quietly reviewed, in every tour date being postponed, in every brand manager on the phone at 2 a.m. asking, "Do we stay tied to this name?" Within days of the verdict, Combs' public presence shifted. He canceled appearances, paused business operations, shut down social media comments. A PR firm reportedly dropped him. A liquor brand halted its ongoing campaign. And yet, he hasn't disappeared, not entirely. Behind the scenes, his business holdings are being restructured. Property is being sold. Some assets moved to trusts. According to leaked court documents, at least one shell company is under review by federal investigators. And while there's no official criminal conviction, the investigations haven't stopped. Federal agencies remain active. Sources say grand jury inquiries are ongoing. At least one accuser is cooperating with multiple jurisdictions. And those who once stood silently nearby, some of them are starting to talk. A former producer posted a cryptic message on social media. "You all knew. Don't pretend you didn't." Another artist, unsigned but close to Bad Boy for years, tweeted and deleted, "They made us sign everything. Everything. And we signed it." Even a former stylist, years removed from the spotlight, shared a series of voicemails claiming she had been warned not to testify. Threats or protection? It's impossible to say. And as all of this unfolds, there's a growing tension in the culture. Fans are divided. Some defend him, calling it a smear campaign, pointing to the timing, the money, the settlements. Others ask, if it's all fabricated, why settle so fast? Why so many stories? Why so consistent? And why would a jury go part way, but stop there? Because if there wasn't enough to convict, was there too much to ignore? Meanwhile, Cassie remains largely silent. She's moved on, publicly at least. No interviews, no book deals. But her lawsuit opened a door, one that can't be closed, and others are stepping through it. Since her filing, at least 7 women have come forward with similar claims against figures once protected by the same circles. Executives, managers, former label heads, all part of an era once celebrated, now re-examined. And it raises a larger question, not just about Diddy, but about an entire industry built on image, loyalty, and control. How many of these stories were silenced? How many bought? How many ignored because the music was too good and the man behind it was too powerful? And if a partial verdict is all we get, is that the fault of the jury or the system that shaped the rules before the trial ever began? Because here's the truth. In cases like this, justice doesn't always come in one decision. Sometimes it comes in fragments. Sometimes it never comes at all. The courtroom may have gone quiet, but the questions haven't. And long after the camera stopped rolling, people are still whispering. What did the jury see? What didn't they? And who exactly is being protected? Sean Combs built an empire. He wasn't just an artist. He was a brand, a mogul, a symbol of Black excellence, hustle, and generational wealth. From Uptown Records to Bad Boy, from Biggie to Revolt, from the club floors of Manhattan to Forbes' billionaire lists. But legacies are rarely clean, and power unchecked rarely stays private. Now, after years of silence and months of scrutiny, that legacy sits in limbo, because what we're left with isn't closure, it's a fracture. In trust, in justice, in how we define accountability when fame and influence warp the rules. The jury didn't give a full verdict, but the industry might. Behind closed doors, deals are collapsing, collaborations shelved, unreleased music frozen in litigation. And still, Diddy hasn't been arrested. He hasn't been convicted. Not yet. And maybe never. Because this wasn't just about what could be proven. It was about what was allowed to be shown. And the bigger question, the one no one wants to say out loud, if this case couldn't get a full verdict, what kind of case ever will? We watched the footage, we read the filings, we heard from accusers, saw the raids, followed the timeline. But even now, the truth feels just out of reach. Is that because he's innocent? Or because the system, by design, doesn't reach men like him? Maybe both. Maybe neither. Do you think Diddy's influence affected the verdict? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe now. But what we do know is this. When power is this concentrated, when silence is rewarded, and when verdicts can stop halfway, it forces us all to look in the mirror. What are we willing to ignore? Who are we willing to protect? And what does it say when the loudest stories are the ones no one can finish? You've heard the evidence. You've seen the pattern. You've followed every twist, every sealed motion, every sidestep. So ask yourself, was this justice or just a performance of it? And if this is what accountability looks like, what happens when there's no spotlight left at all?